The date was November 17, 2012. For the veteran fisherman José Salvador Alvarenga, known by everyone in the seaside town of Costa Azul, Mexico as simply Pino, it was supposed to be a standard 2-day trip. Pino, a man whose skin was the color of dried teak and whose laugh was as loud as a gasoline engine, was no stranger to the water. The sea was his office, his hunting ground, and his home. His companion was a young, quiet deckhand named Ezequiel Cordoba, just 22 years old, new to the job and nervous about the forecast. Their boat was a modest 25-foot fiberglass skiff, the Cigarro, equipped with a single outboard engine, a small, insulated cooler, and their fishing gear, long lines, hooks, and bait. They pushed off the coast into a deceptively calm morning. They were 50 miles offshore when the world changed. The storm didn't ease in, it erupted. The sky turned from blue to a bruised, violent purple in minutes. The waves, which had been gentle swells, became monstrous, frothing giants, towering over the small skiff. Pino fought the engine, trying to turn the bow into the waves, but the sea was relentless. The wind screamed at 60 miles per hour, and the rain hammered down with the force of ball bearings. Then came the first devastating blow. A rogue wave, taller than any building, slammed over the stern, killing the engine instantly. The precious radio, exposed to the elements, went silent, filled with salt water. They were deaf, blind, and paralyzed. The anchor. Pino roared over the wind, his voice raw. Ezequiel scrambled, but the anchor line, tangled in the sudden chaos, snapped. The Cigarro was now completely adrift, a fiberglass toy being tossed in a violent bathtub. They clung to the gunnels for 2 full days and nights, the constant, sickening motion destroying their stomachs. By the time the storm finally spat them out, the boat was a wreck. The fishing lines were gone, the cooler had been breached, and most critically, all their food and fresh water had been washed overboard. The sun, when it finally reappeared, was not a welcome sight. It was a merciless, brutal orb, promising dehydration and agony. On the 3rd day, the last vestiges of land had vanished below the horizon. All that remained was an endless, shimmering blue desert beneath a searing sky. Pino looked at the meager supplies. The only things left were the large, empty plastic water jugs that had been used as buoys, and a single, shallow plastic container used for bait. Ezequiel, the young man, was already breaking down. He was curled in the fetal position, his hands clutching his head, whispering prayers. Pino felt the panic. It was a cold, crawling dread that tried to seize his limbs and paralyze his will. It was the realization that in this vast, crushing emptiness, he was entirely and absolutely alone, save for the terrified boy. But Pino was a man of the sea. He had dealt with unexpected crises before, not on this scale but with the same unflinching principle. He knew that the moment he gave in to the panic, the ocean would win. He didn't scream at Ezequiel. He didn't waste energy on useless anger. He applied the first protocol of the deep. Acknowledge the end, then build a new beginning. He checked his inventory. 1. Water, 0. 2. Food, 0. 3. Tools, 2 large fishing hooks, tangled but intact. 2 pieces of rope. The plastic bait container. A small, rusty knife he carried for gutting fish. He had to find water. Without it, they had 3 days tops. For the next 2 months, the 2 men drifted, their sanity hanging by the thin thread of Pino's controlled focus. The water. Pino knew that the body's need for water trumps everything. His solution was desperate and agonizing: turtle blood. When they were lucky enough to capture a sea turtle, a monumental task involving lassoing them by their flippers with rope, Pino would immediately cut the creature open and drink the blood, warm and salty but life-sustaining. He taught Ezequiel the painful necessity of it, how to ignore the instinctual revulsion. The food, the ocean though cruel, was also a provider. Pino fashioned a hook and line and with almost supernatural patience began fishing. He caught small fish, pilotfish, mahi-mahi, and devoured them raw, eyes and all, extracting every last bit of nutrient and moisture. He learned to catch passing seabirds by luring them with pieces of raw fish and then snapping their necks in an instant. The shelter, the small skiff, offered no shade. The relentless sun quickly destroyed their skin, burning them down to the muscle. Pino rigged a piece of plastic debris he salvaged from the water, a large, thin sheet, as a temporary awning, a pathetic but vital shield against the heat stroke that claimed so many castaways. Pino's approach was not one of hope, but of pure, logical logistics. He turned every single passing object into a resource. The plastic bottles. He saved every one, using them as flotation devices and emergency reservoirs for rainwater. The boat bilge. He found a way to filter the rare, brackish rainwater that collected there. In his own hands, He used them to tear the fish apart, his fingernails becoming sharp, blunt tools. But while Pino mastered the physical reality, Ezekiel was losing the mental war. Dehydration and malnutrition led to intense hallucinations. Ezekiel saw lights that weren't there. He swore he heard his mother calling his name. The constant, violent rolling of the boat was a physical torment that broke his spirit. Pino tried everything. He talked to the young man. He shared his meager portions of raw fish. He forced him to drink the turtle blood. "You have to stay seated, Ezekiel," Pino would plead, using the only mental language he knew. "The panic is a wave. Let it pass. Focus on the next fish. The next drop of rain. Do not let the fear become the actor." But Ezekiel couldn't hold the line. He succumbed to a profound, paralyzing depression. He stopped drinking the blood, claiming it made him sick. He refused to eat the raw meat. Finally, around day 60, Ezekiel made a final, devastating decision. He looked at Pino, his eyes hollowed out by the sun and the terror. "I can't do it anymore, Pino," he whispered. "I'm not strong enough to watch myself die like this." Ezekiel Cordoba died peacefully, a victim not of the ocean, but of his own shattered will. Pino kept the boy's body with him for 6 days, talking to him, unable to face the final, irreversible act of pushing his friend into the sea. It was the single greatest psychological burden of the entire ordeal. When he finally did it, the ocean was quiet. Pino was truly and utterly alone. Day 70 to day 400. This became the long, dark middle passage of the story. Pino had survived the loss of his companion, but the real enemy now was the silence. Pino had to create a new protocol to survive the solitude. 1. The narrative. He began talking to himself. Not just murmuring, but maintaining a constant, unbroken monologue. He recounted his life, his family, his favorite meals. He argued with imaginary friends. He used words to prove to himself that his mind was still functional, that he was still anchored to reality. 2. The calendar. He needed to keep track of time. He used the large plastic buoys, marking each passing day with a small, careful scratch of his rusty knife. The physical act of marking the day was a victory, proof that he had earned another 24 hours. 3. The flinch. The sharks were constant company. They would follow the boat, their black eyes watching him with unsettling intelligence. One day, a huge shark brushed the side of the skiff. Pino's body jerked, his fear screaming for a reaction. He forced himself to hold his breath and be still. He refused to give the predator the satisfaction of a panicked response. He taught himself that his stillness was the greatest deterrent. The food became his religion. He ate everything he caught. Raw fish, raw birds, jellyfish, and even the occasional small venomous sea snake, after careful decapitation and disposal of the head. He knew that the single greatest killer out here wasn't thirst, but the failure to adapt. He had to become one with the ocean's food chain. Around day 200, the hallucinations began to manifest not as frightening delusions, but as companions. Ezekiel came back. He would sit across from Pino silently, sometimes smiling, sometimes crying. Pino knew he wasn't real, but he accepted the company. He would talk to the vision of his friend, describing the day's fishing yield or complaining about the sun. The hallucinations were a safety valve, a way for his mind to process the endless, crushing silence without shattering entirely. By observing the hallucination, by knowing it was a coping mechanism rather than reality, Pino remained seated at the helm of his own consciousness. He was the last man on Earth, drifting across the largest ocean on the planet, but his mind was running on perfect surgical logic. Day 438. Pino had drifted nearly 6,700 miles across the Pacific Ocean, a distance few navigators would attempt intentionally. He was a living skeleton, his body bloated and thin in odd places, his hair matted, his fingernails like claws. The wind had been pushing him westward for months. One afternoon he awoke from a sun-drugged stupor. The sky was still blue, the ocean still immense. But on the horizon, beneath the haze, was a distinct, undeniable dark line. The sight of it broke the control for the first time in over a year. A primal, guttural sob ripped from his chest. But before the emotion could become a flood, the protocol snapped back into place. Not now. The land is the danger. You must approach it with calculation. He knew that the crashing waves of a reef or shore could destroy his frail skiff instantly. After 438 days, it would be a cruel irony to die 100 yards from safety. He used the last of his strength to fashion a makeshift paddle from a piece of plastic debris in his belt, and began steering the boat toward a small sandy inlet, the easiest point of entry he could see. The skiff finally ran aground on a small palm-covered island, Eben Atoll in the Marshall Islands. Pino didn't jump out. He didn't rush toward the trees. He remained seated for a long, agonizing moment, allowing his body and mind to process the total, irreversible change in environment. When he finally moved, it was slow, agonizing. His legs, unused to the resistance of gravity, buckled immediately. He crawled out of the skiff and onto the sand. He was in pain, but he was alive. He crawled into the nearest patch of shade and sat down. He didn't eat. He didn't drink. He simply sat and allowed the sheer, overwhelming reality of firm ground beneath his hands to register. He was discovered 2 days later by a local couple, Emmy Libicmito and her husband, who found the wreck and the sun-crazed, near-death man lying beside it. When the world learned of José Alvarenga, they were stunned. The longest-known single sailor survival at sea in history. The doctors and psychologists who treated him were fascinated by his composure. He recounted his 438 days with a chilling, surgical clarity, detailing the number of turtles, the diet of raw birds, the hallucinations of his friend. They asked him the central question: how did you not go mad? Pino, regaining his strength, his voice quiet, gave them his answer. I had to treat the ocean like my job, he said. Every day was a shift. My boss was the water. My task was to find food and water. I never stopped doing the job. When the panic came, when the pain came, I didn't fight it. I looked at it. I acknowledged it. And then I went back to work. He had survived, not by hoping for rescue, but by calculating for persistence. He had eliminated the variable of emotion from his survival equation. He had learned to sit in the silence of the deepest, darkest isolation and simply wait for the chaos to pass. José Alvarenga's incredible journey wasn't just a physical feat. It was the ultimate, prolonged display of mental invulnerability. He proved that the greatest wilderness is not the ocean, but the uncharted territory of a mind stripped bare by terror, and that the only true escape is through unwavering control. He didn't beat the ocean. He outlasted it. If the unbelievable true story of José Alvarenga reminded you that your greatest strength lies in your unflinching focus, then please hit the like button. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of extraordinary human endurance and survival strategy. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that the world's chaos is always temporary, but controlled persistence is permanent.